Hi, my name is Mike Carrigan, and I own a company in Kansas City in the historic Jazz District across the street from 12th Street and Vine. Now, you might recognize 12th Street and Vine because it's referenced in that song, Kansas City, here I come. He sings, I'll see you at the corner of 12th Street and Vine and get my Kansas City wine. Well, here you might look in the background and see what we do is pretty unique. We hand make musical instruments, primarily brass instruments like trumpets and trombones. We've got more instruments we're going to be starting to make over the coming years. And if you were to walk through our factory, see the building that we're in, see the neighborhood that we're in, see some of the tooling that we work with, and then see some of the artifacts we have in our showroom, you'd learn a lot about jazz history, music history, and the evolution of manufacturing in the United States. Some of the equipment we use is very historically significant. In fact, most of the tools that we have in here are. It's really exciting. You might know some of the stories. You may have heard some of the names that we reference when we give a tour and walk people through our facility. And then there's going to be a lot of people or companies that you're not familiar with that will connect you with. So I'll just throw a few things out. There's a really famous trombone maker in Burbank, California, and Los Angeles. His name was Earl Williams. This was his actual spinning machine that he used to spin all of his bells with. There was a really famous trumpet maker who started making trumpets also around the 1920s or so. His name was Dominic Calicchio. This was one of Dominic's original lathes that he used to make lots of little bits and pieces with his instruments. We have mandrels and tools from companies out of California, companies in Chicago, companies in Ohio, companies in Elkhart, Indiana, companies like the Benge Company. Eldon Benge founded his company in Chicago. He was a really famous trumpet maker, but he was also, a lot of people don't realize, he was a great trumpet player. Check this out. Even this poster came out of a music store that used to carry the Benge trumpet here in Kansas City. That's probably from the 1950s. That's pretty cool. That's a young Eldon Benge before he moved from Chicago to California. We got a lot of artifacts and pieces. Let me show you one other thing before I leave the shop, where we make these beautiful instruments. Here behind me, I've got a wall of world-renowned musicians that have literally come in to visit our facility from around the world to see us preserving this craft and making instruments. I have a parts cabinet here. This parts cabinet was made by a gentleman by the name of Zeke Zarchi. Zeke played trumpet for Glenn Miller back during and before World War II. He was one of Glenn Miller's trumpet players, and he made that cabinet in trade for a custom trumpet. That's pretty cool. Now I'm going to walk through. We've got so many more bits and pieces and tales to tell in the shop if you were taking a tour. And we love to tell these stories. When we give a tour, people, classes, kids come through, musicians from around the world. We want them to connect with the history, the important history and significant history that Kansas City has to offer with its jazz. We take you through the neighborhood. Here's a panoramic image of our building would actually be right over here behind these trees. This image was taken right across the street from where we are, in the historic Jazz District of 12th and Vine. That image was taken in 1909. We talk a little bit about that. Here's the same area with an important garden that was taken, this one in the 20s. As you walk through our building and our showroom, you'll see really significant artifacts like this. This is one of Freddie Hubbard's trumpets. It's a Calicchio trumpet that Freddie Hubbard played on. And this is a Graves keyed bugle, one of the first and most important, significant brass instruments made in the United States by one of the most significant makers of all time in the United States, and his name was Graves. That keyed bugle is circa 1830s. We got a lot of stuff, a lot of really cool things. When you get to see them in person, a lot of kids especially, and older musicians, when they come through our shop, they see things they've never heard of or seen before or anything. And I love to connect them with that history. Things like this. Another Kansas City native, his name was Frankie Trumbauer. Check out Frankie. Here's a couple of images of him. Frankie Trumbauer was a saxophonist, and he was a really good friend with a gentleman by the name of Bix Beiderbecke. That traveling trunk, on top of it, it says, Frankie Trumbauer, musical instruments do not drop, Paul Whiteman Orchestra Theater. And if you're not familiar with Paul Whiteman, let me tell you this. He discovered a few people you might have heard of. This young singer that was up and coming, Paul Whiteman, said, wow, this is a great singer. I'm going to hire him for my band. The singer's name was Bing Crosby. Or how about George Gershwin, a young piano player that he commissioned to write the theme song for the Paul Whiteman Orchestra. And that gentleman was George Gershwin, and the song he commissioned was Rhapsody in Blue. So this is back in the time when families would gather around. They'd have stereos going and all that kind of stuff, records. They wouldn't gather around the TV. They'd gather around the stereo to listen to musicians. What I'm going to be talking about today is a GoFundMe campaign that we're going to be running. I'm going to show you one more piece of equipment here, and then I'm going to show you what we're talking about with the GoFundMe. I want people to get an understanding of what we do here and how we like to connect people with the history and the significance. And what we're going to talk about is very paramount, I think, to Kansas City. Now check this out. This is a new acquisition we just picked up. This is awesome. This is an original built in 1864. That's during the Civil War. This is an original Steinway grand piano. Steinway, as a lot of people know, one of the most reputable piano makers of all time, known for making the absolute best pianos. This is really an incredible piece of history. In 1863, there was a riot in the city streets of New York City during the enlistment. They were trying to recruit people and draft people. There was a draft riot in the city of New York during the Civil War, and they threatened to burn down the Steinway building. That was the year before this piano was made. This is a 4-digit serial number Steinway, made in New York, in the city, before they moved to what they used to call Steinway Town, which is now known as Astoria, in Astoria, Kansas. Such a really cool piece of history. It's an original Civil War era Steinway grand square piano, and that's going to be really cool. It's going to require some restoration, but that's kind of cool. Check this out. This is what we're talking about today. So, in our possession, we've been guarding this with our lives. This has been offered in private auction for the last couple of years now, very quietly. But now it's come to a pass, and the owner needs to sell this instrument. We've been trying to rehome it for years, and we would love for us to find a way that we could actually keep it in Kansas City. This is a saxophone that belonged to a gentleman by the name of John Jackson. John Jackson was one of Charlie Parker's best friends. He grew up playing in saxophone with him. They played in several groups together. This is John Jackson's actual con alto saxophone, performed on and played by John Jackson. The significant thing, though, beyond that, that's significant in its own, because John has really great history and a solid connection with the evolution of jazz here in Kansas City. But again, he was close friends with Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker, as we all know, had some issues, especially later in life, where he ended up pawning his instrument, finding himself in a situation where he might be performing somewhere and he didn't have a horn. So Charlie Parker would go to his friend John Jackson and he'd say, "Hey, can I borrow your horn? I need something to play tonight in this gig." And it was a known fact, and it was retold by the widow of John Jackson, that Charlie Parker himself would borrow this very saxophone to perform in different various gigs and venues. After John Jackson passed away, it was passed down to one of his prized students, and a good friend of his also, just a younger musician by the name of Ahmad Alaadeen. And Alaadeen was a really close friend of BAC. Alaadeen would tell us stories about how when he could remember when he was a young man sitting in the hallway waiting to take a lesson from his teacher. And in taking a lesson before him was Charlie Parker. So this is a really cool piece of equipment here. This is a true artifact. In my opinion, belongs here somewhere in Kansas City. And I think we'd be a good curator of the history of this instrument. I think it would be a great place for it to be. I think we could connect that with a lot of people. When you come to our shop, you actually see really important, significant pieces that you can lay your eyes on, see closely, even handle. And we have a lot of professional musicians from around the world that have the opportunity to see what we do here. And something like that's really important. Unfortunately, I think if we don't have a way of preserving that here in Kansas City, the home that we find for it is going to end up probably being outside of the United States, and that would be a shame. We want to help out Alaadeen's widow, so it's important that we find a home for this. She needs to get it sold pretty soon. But I'm reaching out to you guys. I don't do this very often. We've got a lot of really cool historic pieces. We don't charge money for tours or anything. We're very passionate about what we do when we make instruments. This is just more of a passion piece for us. I think it would be great for us to connect people. We're trying to help out Alaadeen's widow, But I think this is a really cool piece of history that we can have available for young musicians for years and years to come to actually connect with and see this instrument. Maybe even be able to be in a position where we can loan this horn to be performed by guys here in Kansas City for different events. In fact, Alaadeen would use that instrument every year at the graveside memorial for Charlie Parker, the 21 sax salute, which unfortunately I'm not sure if that's going to happen anymore. We're hoping to. Some musicians here in town are going to try to relaunch that here this year coming up. But it would be really awesome to have somebody like Bobby Watson or someone perform on that instrument. So if you want to help us out, try to preserve this really cool piece of history here in Kansas City and allow us to continue to tell the story about Alaadeen and John Jackson, and then of course Charlie Parker, and have kids connect with an actual instrument that was performed on by him. Please help us out. Spread the word on this GoFundMe. If we don't get it, no big deal. We're just trying to help out the city. I want to keep this